આપ મારી સાથે હતે તો મને કથાનો તથા હેતને લઈને હંમેશા દર્શન પ્રસન્નનો તમારો જોગ રહે. તેથી મનનો ઘણો સંતોષ છે. તમ પર સ્નેહને હેત કુદરતી રહ્યા કરે છે. ભારે પુણ્યના જોરે આ જોગ થઈ ગયો છે અને કુદરતી મારું મન તમારામાં રહ્યા કરે છે. આપ બુદ્ધિશાળી છો ને પૂર્ણ સમજો છો કે મારી ઉપર સ્વામીને હેત અને ભાવ છે તેઓ બીજામાં નથી. માત્ર તમારા પૂરતો અતિશય દાન પુણ્ય અને શુભ સંસ્કારથી મારે તમારાથી છેટે રહેવું તે ગમતું નથી. જીવમાં અસંતોષ રહ્યા કરે છે. તેથી ભેગું રહેવાય તેમ મનમાં રહ્યા કરે છે. આજે પ્રહલાદ અને અમરીશ જેવા સર્વે આ વખતે આપણા મંડળમાં હરિભક્તો છે. અત્યારે તન મન ધનથી જેવી મહારાજ છતાં સ્વામી છતાં સેવા કરતા તેવી કરે છે ને તેવો પ્રેમ અને ભક્તિભાવ છે. તેવા સત્સંગ મંડળમાં આપનું મુખ્ય સ્થાન છે. બહુ જ સ્વામીને મહારાજ રાજી છે. અત્યારે તો આખો સત્સંગ આપની સામું જોઈ રહ્યો છે. પણ આપ વિચારો કે અત્યારે આપના ઉપર પ્રેમ સૌનો જોગી જેવાનો છે. તે અતિ બડું ભાગ્ય માનવા જેવું છે.
પ્રમુખ સ્વામી મહારાજ સર્વોપરી ભગવાનના સર્વોપરી સંત હતા.
प्रमुख स्वामी सुखकारी, प्रमुख स्वामी सुखकारी, ये संत परम हितकारी.
गाथा महापुरुषनी संत परम हितकारी, गाथा महापुरुषनी संत परम हितकारी.
महापुरुषनी आछे कथा प्रमुख सुखकारी.
Love, a formidable force. The real power of love is only known when it turns into an unwavering, unshakable, and unparalleled feeling towards someone or something. In the spiritual world, such immense love towards God or towards a sadhu who has realized God has the power to break one away from Maya and the perpetual cycle of births and deaths that have bounded countless souls since eternity. Shastriji Maharaj, believed by many to be God realized and the gateway to transcend this Maya, was sacrificing everything to unveil the eternal truth behind the principles of Akshar and Purushottam as established by Bhagavan Swaminarayan. But even when his quest was at a critical stage, he still found it difficult to contain his unyielding love towards Narayan Swarup Das. The words in his letter dated 31st May 1946 were sentiments that could never be transferred onto anyone else. This was an eternal bond. In Shastriji Maharaj's heart lived Narayan Swarup Das, or Naranda as he would lovingly call him. And in Naranda's heart lived only his guru, Shastriji Maharaj.
If there's one thing that Pramukh Swami really looked forward to was traveling with Shastriji Maharaj. And whenever he got the opportunity to travel with Shastriji Maharaj, he made the most of it.
He did all forms of personal seva for Shastriji Maharaj. He would prep his bath, he would warm up his water, he would lay out his puja, prepare his meals. And he'd also do all of these things with a great deal of devotion. He even made arrangements for the Hari Bhaktos meals so that they had their meals taken care of. When Shastriji Maharaj rested in the afternoon, he preferred complete darkness. So whenever possible, Swami Shri would make those arrangements. And since there was no electricity at the time, Swami Shri would stay up during the afternoon, personally fanning Shastriji Maharaj while he slept. Shastriji Maharaj showered his beloved disciple with the same type of love in return.
There was a Haribhakt by the name of Kashidas from Bhadran. He would describe this as if he was a long-lost child who was going to meet his father, and the first time that the parent has a reaction of meeting the child, similar was Shastriji Maharaj's reaction every time he saw Narayan Swarup Swami. So these are some things that we would see the interaction between the Guru and the Shishya. Also, whenever Pramukh Swami Maharaj would travel with Shastriji Maharaj, Shastriji Maharaj would make sure that he would seat him next to him. Whenever he'd be having a meal or something, help him, serve him. Also sometimes, lovingly encourage him to eat more food as well. And that's how Shastriji Maharaj would look after Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Often, if Shastriji Maharaj needed to go out, normally the santos would travel in pairs. So Pramukh Swami was his first choice as a jod. So he would take Pramukh Swami Maharaj with him as his jod. Also, sometimes Shastriji Maharaj, we've heard many times that Pramukh Swami Maharaj is pag. Shastriji Maharaj would tie his pag on Pramukh Swami Maharaj's own head.
In this way, Shastriji Maharaj and Swami Shri's mutual love was a defining feature of their vichar.
Shastriji Maharaj took Pramukh Swami Maharaj to Karachi for Parayan and to meet the Haribhaktas, because there was a mandir there અને ત્યાં પારાયણ કરવાની હતી. તો ત્યાં આગળ લઈ ગયા અને હરિભક્તોને ત્યાં પધરામણી કરે.
While there, Shastriji Maharaj once grasped Swami Shri's slim wrist and he said, "How will a frail body like this befit a throne?" Shastriji Maharaj was implying that he wanted Swami Shri to add some weight. And he wanted him to look like a fuleli choda fadi, as Shastriji Maharaj said. He told Swami Shri that he needed to have a plump, round wrist. He also mentioned that wealthy householders would feed their children with tasty spices and sweets and almonds, and that Swami Shri should eat those types of foods.
And every day, Shastriji Maharaj would feed him 1 or 2 pieces of mithais so that his body will be big and he would look great, on a Sinhasan. This is the love and affection that Shastriji Maharaj had with Pramukh Swami Maharaj.
Shastriji Maharaj was in Surat during the month of Shravan, and at the Bhatiyawadi, where the Parayan was happening, Shastriji Maharaj was elaborating and narrating the Satsangi Jivan Parayan. And once he completed the chapter on the Satsangi Jivan Mahatmya, he just casually told Swami Shri to continue the rest of the Parayan. It was in Swami Shri's blood. That was his love for Shastriji Maharaj, that he readily accepted what Shastriji Maharaj wanted. Now you can just imagine in his early 20s, Swami Shri, he sits on the Vyaspit and then he carries on with the Parayan.
When Pramukh Swami Maharaj had finished the Parayan, Shastriji Maharaj was so happy on him, that all the hars that Shastriji Maharaj had on his neck, he had put on Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And he put both hands on Pramukh Swami Maharaj, elating that he was so happy with Pramukh Swami Maharaj.
So on one of these days, during the Parayan, a photo session was arranged where Shastriji Maharaj would be seated with garlands, with the scripture in front of him on the Vyaspit. But there was something that was stopping Shastriji Maharaj, and he looked at Swami Shri and he said to Swami Shri to come and sit next to him.
And normally when a person sits on a Vyaspit, there's only room for one person. But Shastriji Maharaj wanted Narayan Swarup Das, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, to sit next to him.
Now Swami Shri explains to Shastriji Maharaj that, Swami, this photo shoot is for you, not for me. But Shastriji Maharaj wasn't having any of that. He wanted Swami Shri to sit with him. Pramukh Swami Maharaj explains to him, Swami, there's not even an inch of space. How do you expect me to sit next to you? Shastriji Maharaj said, no, sit next to me.
And Pramukh Swami Maharaj saw, look, there's other santos there, Nirgunda Swami, Shastriji Swarup Swami, older santos there. Why don't you pick them to sit there? And Shastriji Maharaj, no, you sit next to me.
And eventually, Swami Shri fulfilling the wish of Shastriji Maharaj, he squeezes himself very tightly next to Shastriji Maharaj, and Shastriji Maharaj is very happy. And from this alone you can see that the innermost wish of Shastriji Maharaj was that he wanted Naranda to be in the forefront.
And even when no one was watching, Shastriji Maharaj would take care of Naranda's most subtle needs. Shastriji Maharaj's 81st birthday celebrations were commencing in Bochasan, and they were getting things ready there. So there's so much work to do around the whole complex, getting all the rubbish cleaned up and building marquees and tents or whatever at that time. And Shastriji Maharaj and the other Hari Bhaktas and Santos, they were all in seva, basically. And Shastriji Maharaj would always go wherever the seva was. And he would sit there for a while and watch everybody do seva and also help out at the same time. But once Shastriji Maharaj, at that time, he had left for a little while because he had something else to do.
As he left, many of the people who had joined into the seva left as well. Ultimately, only Swami Shri and 2 other Hari Bhakto stayed till the very end. And before that, at around 12 to 12:30 p.m., Shastriji Maharaj returned to see the progress, and when he saw Swami Shri, he was greatly pleased with Swami Shri. So happy, he blessed him with his inner Rajipo. This incident reinforced what Shastriji Maharaj had already known, that Swami Shri's actions were not superficial displays to impress others, but they were the result of a deep-rooted devotion. And so, because of how engaged Swami Shri remained in seva, inconveniences related to food and sleep were pretty much the norm. When he prepared to rest late at night after he finished his seva, sometimes there would be a quilt for him to sleep on, but a lot of times there wouldn't. So knowing this, Shastriji Maharaj began to keep one quilt on his bed as if he were using it as a pillow. And since it was on his bed, no one would try to take it. When Swami Shri would arrive late at night after finishing his seva, Shastriji Maharaj would give that one quilt to Swami Shri so that he would have something to sleep on. Amidst all these arrangements, for his Janma Jayanti, Shastriji Maharaj did not miss the chance to care for Swami Shri. In Shastriji Maharaj's mind, the praise from the celebration meant nothing compared to his feelings for Swami Shri.
We were starting to see Shastriji Maharaj play a truly motherly role in Naranda's life. A mother who provided care and comfort to Naranda. And even during times of despair and dejection, we could see how much Shastriji Maharaj loved him. As we all know, Shastriji Maharaj in his later years, he was suffering heavily with arthritis and rheumatism. And in order to relieve him of this pain, Bhailal Bhai of Nadiyad, who was an Ayurvedic doctor, he had made a special massage oil for Shastriji Maharaj. Now the herbs he had used, they were somewhat poisonous, very concentrated, very intense in power. And this would be applied to his knees every day, twice or thrice a day. They'd be massaged in order to relieve him of the pain.
ये oil you get in those bottles, the dark bottle. You see all the bottles are same. India in the Ganibadi, the dark brown type. So every day someone would massage, but that bottle was placed on the window. And next to it, there was also the bottle of castor oil, which Shastriji Maharaj used to take with his ukado, castor oil, because it helps. Castor oil helps your arthritis, and gets rid of the pain.
It so happened one day that Ramji Bhagat, who would dispense the medicines to Shastriji Maharaj, he was not present in the room. And Shastriji Maharaj, he asked Swami Shri to add the castor oil into the morning ukado. It was the first time, so Swami Shri, he stood up, and he picks up the bottle unknowingly, that was the bottle of the massage oil. And he places a spoon of that oil into Shastriji Maharaj's ukado, and he then stirs it, and he gives it to Shastriji Maharaj. Shastriji Maharaj, like every day, he pours the ukaro into a steel saucer, and then he drinks that ukaro. Ashabai of Purushothampura, who was also seated there, and Ashabai is the one who became Mota Swami once Shastriji Maharaj passed away. So Ashabai, he took the saucer to drink up the remaining drops of ukaro with the mahima that it's prasadi. And he takes one sip, and immediately his throat begins to burn. And it was so unbearable, he just stopped speaking. And through actions, he would tell them that, he's going through this burning sensation, it's powerfully burning him. And he asks for something to subside this pain. So instantly they give him some ghee, they try milk, and they eventually even gave him shiro, thinking that it will help him through. But even then, the pain did not subside. It was then that everybody realized that Shastriji Maharaj had been accidentally given the deadly oil that was used to massage on his knee instead of the castor oil. Now everybody standing there were worried, thinking that if just taking a sip of this ukaro and Ashabai is in pain, what must be happening to Shastriji Maharaj?
બધાએ થયું આ તો બહુ મોટું ખરાબ કામ કર્યું સ્વામીનામાં કંઈક થઈ જશે અને સ્વામી બધાનો ખલાસ થશે ને એટલે બધા મોટા મોટા હરિભક્તો બી જાણ તે જાણ મોટા સ્વામી બધા ધમાલ કરવા માંડ્યા કે તું સમજતો નથી તારે નાખવાનું છે તારે આપવી ના જોઈએ તારે મૂરખ ખબર નથી એવું બહુ બધા હરિભક્તોને બોલવા માંડ્યા કે હજાનું હોય આપણે આપવું નહીં ને બધું વાત કરી એટલે મને પછી જરા ખોટું લાગ્યું અરે રડવું આવી ગયું એટલે મારી મનમાં જરા ખૂબ દુઃખ થયું રડવું ખૂબ આવે એટલે પછી બેઠેલો રડ્યા કરું.
And he kept on thinking that how will I be looked upon in this satsang? People will think that I'm the cause of this whole thing, that Shastriji Maharaj is in pain, Shastriji Maharaj may pass away. Now you can imagine, on one side the intense love, and on the other side this mishap. And he was crying profusely, seated in the corner in Shastriji Maharaj's room. But Shastriji Maharaj, he was very calm, and he was conducting the Mahapuja in the Rang Mandap just underneath the mandir in Sarangpur. And he was fully engaged in that, nothing happening to him.
સ્વામીને ખબર પડે એટલે અહીંયા આવ્યા એટલે હું જે કોના બેઠો રડતો ત્યાં આવીને બેઠા મને કહે શું છે હું આવું થઈ ગયું એટલે સ્વામી કહે તું મુજાય શું કરવા કે શંકર ભગવાને ઝેર પચાવી દીધું મીરાએ ઝેર પચાવી મીરા કહે શંકર જેવા ભગત આપણે નથી શ્રીજી મહારાજ કંઈ નહીં થવા દે અને આશીર્વાદ આપ્યા પછી રાજી બહુ થયા કે કંઈ કરીશ નહીં ચિંતા કરીશ નહીં કશું થવાનું છે નહીં.
Don't worry, no one will point a finger at you. It's a mistake. And actually it is better that I drank instead of massaging the oil on my body and not getting better or having little effect. At least now it's gone inside my body, it will have more effect.
It was these words that brought some strength to Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Shastriji Maharaj still realized that he's not fully in himself. So he goes on to say that, look, if you complete your Sanskrit studies, then I will give you the mala that I've been turning in my puja, which Shriji Maharaj had sanctified. So cheer up, everything's going to be well, don't worry.
And then nothing happened to him. Actually, what Shastriji Maharaj said became true. Before he could not even walk, people had to lift him. But after that medicine, he drank that medicine with the ukado, he could walk. This is the Leela of the Satpurush. He consoled him like a father would console a son, like a mother would console her own son. Give them that motivation, that inspiration. Okay, don't worry, everything will be okay.
Remarkable was the fact that people were witnessing Shastriji Maharaj change his conduct around faithful Naranda. A conduct that was primarily regal and formal in front of others was evidently relaxed and harmonious when in front of Narayan Swarup Das. In return, focused on pleasing his guru, Narayan Swarup Das was ready to lay down his life for Shastriji Maharaj by offering unprecedented and unparalleled guru-bhakti.
So in whatever Swamiji did in his life, his foremost and his only goal was to please Shastriji Maharaj. And to him that was of paramount importance, and everything else was like immaterial. It wasn't there for him. It's non-existent. So one prasang really defines it so well is when Shastriji Maharaj was in Sarangpur, recovering from the pain of the arthritis that he was going through. One morning, casually during a katha, Tulsibai of Purushothampura, he was seated there, and in passing, Shastriji Maharaj just says to Tulsibai that if Naranda was here and he recited the Bhakta Chintamani to me, then I'd be relieved of all the pain and I'll be so well immediately. Now, it was a casual talk. There was no agna in this. There was no sort of insistence that Narayan Swami, meaning Swami Shri, comes over. A few days later, Tulsibai, he goes back home, and then he makes a visit to Atladra. Now, Swami Shri was in Atladra at that time because of the construction work of Atladra Mandir that was going on, and he was an integral part of that construction. So Tulsibai, he goes over to Swami Shri and he says that whilst I was in Sarangpur, Shastriji Maharaj just remembered you. That's all he said, nothing else.
As soon as Swami Shri heard, he grabbed his portlu. He arranged for his George sons to come with him to Sarangpur. The heavy rain at the time did nothing to dampen Swami Shri's desire to get to Sarangpur and see Shastriji Maharaj. There's a train called Saurashtra Mail that was scheduled to come into Vadodara station at 3 a.m. Swami Shri planned to take this train to get to Ahmedabad. He and the George son took a horse carriage to get to the Vadodara train station. The train was on time, but it was completely full.
રાતની ગાડી એટલે રાત્રે લોકો તો બુકિંગ થયેલું એટલે બધા પેક કરીને જ બેઠેલા હોય. થર્ડ ક્લાસનો ડબ્બો હોય, એની અંદર પણ માણસો ખૂબ જ ઊભા ઊભા અને બધા કેટલાક સૂતેલા હોય. એટલે એ પ્રમાણે બધા ડબ્બામાં ફર્યા. હવે ગાડી ઊભી રહે ત્યાં આગળ 2-3-4 મિનિટ જેટલી. એટલે ગાડીના ડબ્બેથી ઠેઠ ડબ્બા સુધી પાછા ગયા, પણ કોઈ ગાડી ભાઈનું ઉઘડીને રાત્રે સૂતા હોય, માણસો એ હોય એટલે ઉઘડીને વરસાદ તેકડે ખૂબ પડતો. અટલાદરાથી નીકળ્યો ત્યારથી વરસાદ એટલે ધોધમાર જેવા વરસાદ જેવું હતું. એટલે ત્યાં સ્ટેશને ફર્યા કર્યા પણ કંઈ પતો લાગ્યો નહીં. ગાડી ઉપડી એટલે પછી ગમે તે ડબ્બે ચડી જવું એટલે પછી રેલ જે એન્જિન છે એના પછીનો ત્રીજો ચોથો ડબ્બે અમે ચડી ગયા. પણ અંદર કોઈ જવા ન દીધા એટલે બહાર ઊભા રહીને જ અમારે જવું પડ્યું. એટલે 2 જણા ડબે અમે સેન્ડલ ઓલું હરિયો જાલી અને બાયનું જાલીને ઊભા રહ્યા બાલડી સાઈડની અંદર.
His thin body was already completely drenched from the heavy, steady rain. Wind flew into his face and to his body. His body was shivering from the cold. On top of that, soot emanating from the coal engine flew directly into his eyes. The clouds had completely covered the stars and the moon. It was so dark that the ground beneath had completely disappeared. The darkness was even more ominous and disorienting when the train went over flooded rivers, where he could only hear the water flowing below and see nothing. Imagine this sublime sadhu hanging on to the side of a train cabin, doors closed, holding onto a thin metal rod, shivering, fighting off the elements, darkness, exhaustion. Amidst the most adverse circumstances, Swami Shri exhibited the most supreme form of guru-bhakti. Throughout the ordeal, Swami Shri had to maintain his footing on a fairly thin step and make sure not to loosen his grip on the metal rod. Meanwhile, his clothes and his portlu over his shoulder was being weighed down by the unforgiving rain. He didn't have a free hand to wipe away the rain from his face or to rub his eyes for some relief from the irritation. He was stuck in this frozen posture for about 100 to 125 kilometers of travel.
Eventually, the train arrives in Ahmedabad. The Saurashtra Mail is the one that they were on. And now they had to take the Somnath Mail, which would then take them via Dhodka and Dhanduka. And then they would then make their passage to Sarangpur. But on the train station in Ahmedabad, they got to know that the Somnath Mail had been cancelled due to the heavy rains. And so immediately Swami Shri, he tells his sadhu Jod that let's get back onto this train and we'll take the longer route via Surendranagar and go to Botad. And from there we'll walk it to Sarangpur. Now another problem arose. the ticket that Swamiji had was only valid for Vadodara to Ahmedabad. The other ticket they had was valid for Ahmedabad to Bhavnagar. Now that train had been cancelled, so that ticket was of no use on this train. So the ticket inspector, when he came along, he asked and he checked and he saw that this ticket is not valid. And he just told Swamiji that you now have to pay the penalty for this. And Swamiji very calmly and very respectfully, he explains to this ticket inspector that my Guru Shastriji Maharaj is not well, he's severely ill, and I need to be with him. And we've just had a problem that the Somnath mail, here's the ticket, you can see, it's been cancelled, and I need to immediately get to him, and I need to be there.
When the conductor tried once more to ask them to pay, a fellow passenger explained to the conductor on Swamiji's behalf that these sadhus don't keep money on them. The conductor was touched by Swamiji's innocence and sincere plea. He allowed them to travel without having to buy a ticket. Swamiji finally made it to Botad at about 3:30 in the afternoon, but the overcast skies made it seem closer to about 7 p.m. When they got to Botad, the heavy rains had flooded the entire area so thoroughly that you couldn't make out the roads or feel confident on where it was safe to walk.
Now there was no vehicle for them to travel, and fortunately, Vashram Bhai of the Hanuman Mandir, that's in Sarangpur, now he had come on a horse cart to collect other sadhus from the Junu Mandir, from the Hanuman Mandir, who were supposed to be coming on the trains. But they hadn't arrived either. So he said to Naranda that place your potlas in this cart, and when I come back to Sarangpur, whenever, in the evening or late night, I'll ensure that these potlas, they are given to you in Sarangpur Mandir.
And Swamiji did so, but he didn't sit in the carriage just so that he could avoid a conflict, a possible conflict that might happen. He and his George Sant then began walking towards Sarangpur Mandir. The current road that goes directly from Botad to Sarangpur did not exist back then, and so there was a rough path that all the vehicles took. But water was flowing rapidly in the ditches along that path. In some parts, the water was neck deep in these ditches. As they walked along the watery path, they were never sure how deep the next step would go. Swamiji just kept walking, having placed his trust completely in Shastriji Maharaj guiding them. Suddenly, a shepherd appeared along the path and instructed them to simply follow him.
So the shepherd, he says to him that, look, hold on to this stick. And the accompanying sadhu, you hold on to the hand of Swamiji. And the three of us, we will walk across this river, but you have to walk behind me. The steps I take are the steps that you must take. And so, accordingly, that's how they do it. And Swamiji is taken across that river by the shepherd. And he accompanies them all the way to Sarangpur, the 12-kilometer journey. He's with them. And he takes them to the doors of Sarangpur and he says, here you are. Now I'm leaving into the village. And he just suddenly disappears into the village.
Swamiji had taken down his name and information, but when they looked into finding him the next day, there was no one by his name and description in the village. It is commonly thought Maharaj himself came in the form of a shepherd to guide Bapa to Sarangpur. The Falgu river in the village was also flowing in full force. Because of the flooded river, the wall along the mandir gate had fallen. And because of this, Swamiji had to enter the mandir compound from another entrance. Swamiji went directly to Shastriji Maharaj's quarters.
મંદિરમાં ગયા પછી સ્વામી ખાટલામાં પડેલા હતા. અમે તો બધા કપડાં બપડા ભીણાઈ ગયેલા હતા. એટલે પહેલાં એમ જ થયું કે આપણે પહેલાં સ્વામીના દર્શન કરવા જઈએ. એટલે સ્વામીના દર્શન કર્યા. સ્વામી એકદમ બેઠા થઈ ગયા. બેઠા થયા અને મને કહે આવી ગયો દર્શન પછી બહુ કેવી રીતે આવ્યો, કેમ આવ્યો? આવું વરસાદ હતો પણ મારા ભાઈ આપની ઈચ્છા હતી ને આપના દર્શનની ઈચ્છા હતી ને આપની આજ્ઞા હતી એટલે આવી ગયો છું. સારું પણ કે બહુ ભીડો પડ્યો, બહુ કષ્ટ પડ્યું. કષ્ટ તો કંઈ પડ્યું નથી પણ આપનું આવું દરદ ને આપની જે વાત છે એ મનમાં દુઃખ થાય એટલે આપણા ખાસ દર્શન થયા એટલે અમને બધી શાંતિ છે અને કોઈ તકલીફ જેવું લાગ્યું નથી. તો અહીં પછી પાછા ઊભા થયા. પછી ભીણે કપડે જ મળ્યા માથે હાથ મૂક્યો અને કહ્યું કે આવું જે સેવાનું તને મહિમા છે તો મહારાજ સ્વામી તારા પર બહુ રાજી થશે અને આવી નવી સેવા અને આવી એવી ભક્તિ કરવાનું તને બળ મળશે, અમારા આશીર્વાદ છે, એમ કરીને સ્વામી રાજીપો બતાવ્યો.
Swamiji always maintained a zero level of self-importance. Every pore of his being prioritized his guru's eminence. Avo mahima hoy to kaam thai jai, Shastriji Maharaj said, as he stood up and pulled Swamiji, wet clothes and all, into such a loving embrace, you'd think he was going to lose himself completely into Swamiji.
This prasang alone, it tells us so much of the relationship between the guru and the disciple. It wasn't an agna. It wasn't that he wanted him to be in Sarangpur. Just a casual talk. Just to Tulsi Bhai. Okay, if he was here, I'd be relieved of my pain. Shastriji Maharaj had intense love for Swami Shri. Swami Shri had intense love for Shastriji Maharaj. That is true discipleship. That is true love for the Guru.
So Shastriji Maharaj had given Pramukh Swami Maharaj seva in Atladara Mandir when Atladara Mandir was being built, and they were doing the limestone seva there. And working with limestone is very, very difficult. And many people, they would do that seva for a day and then not come back to that seva again. But Shastriji Maharaj had told Pramukh Swami Maharaj to do this seva, and Pramukh Swami Maharaj did it.
Back in the day, instead of cement, they used to use limestone, and it was a mixture of limestone, sand and water. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often explain the whole process of how they used to mix it, because they didn't have cement mixers back then. It was a pretty manual and a laborious task. Swami would often explain that there was this huge cylinder, a round circular pit. It was like like a trench in which the limestone, the sand and the water is mixed. And in order to mix and churn it, they would use a circular wheel, a stone wheel, which would go around in circles to mix and churn the mixture. You would need one person to navigate the two oxen, which would pull the stone, and you need one person at the back who would use the shovel to mix all the limestone, the water, and the sand in the trench.
They would have to do that 108 times to make a proper mixture of the limestone to be used for foundation and for the building works that were happening there in Atladara. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj, they would do this mixture about 3 times in a day. One in the morning, one in midday afternoon, and one at about 4 o'clock. So 3 times in the day, they would make this mixture, and it would be very hot. And the sun would, obviously in India, it's very, very hot, and the sun would be beating down on them. And the heat from the limestone made it even worse. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he persevered through that seva.
And as a result of this, working in the sun and mixing the limestone, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had some rash-like burns on his skin, on his face, and most of it all over his body. So this is one thing that Swami often talks about. And then during this construction time, when Swami had this rash-like effect on his skin, there was news that Shastriji Maharaj was in a nearby town called Jadeshwar, and he had pneumonia at that time. And so he remembered Pramukh Swami and very lovingly would call him Naranda. And Shastriji Maharaj often would say, if Naranda was here to read the Bhakta Chintamani to me, then I would feel much better.
Swami got the message from Hari Bhaktas and other sadhus that Shastriji Maharaj was remembering him. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj, without a second's notice, whenever Shastriji Maharaj is remembering him, he'll just, get to wherever Shastriji Maharaj was. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he also went to Jadeshwar, and he saw Shastriji Maharaj. And when Shastriji Maharaj saw him, Shastriji Maharaj, even though he had this illness, Shastriji Maharaj had a huge smile on his face. And he said, Naranda aavi gaya.
And immediately Shastriji Maharaj says, Have mandwad mati jase, hinting that I'm going to get much better now that you're over here. And then very lovingly called Pramukh Swami Maharaj and asked for a report from what are things going on in Atladara, etc. And immediately as Pramukh Swami Maharaj came closer, Shastriji Maharaj noticed all the marks on his face. And so Shastriji Maharaj asked, what's actually happened? And then Pramukh Sai Maharaj explained how the heat and the limestone and everything has actually burnt his skin.
પછી સ્વામી નજીક બોલાયો એટલે હાથ ફેરવ્યો પછી મારા સ્વામીની સેવા કરી છે મારા સ્વામી મટાડી દે છે એમ કરીને પછી હાથે આમ બધે શરીરે ફેરવ્યો.
And he said, go to my jodi. He told Pramukh Swami Maharaj to go to my jodi. And in my jodi I have medicine. You take this medicine every day. So Swami took that medicine. And at the same time, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was always reading from the Bhakta Chintamani to Shastriji Maharaj.
Eventually, about a week later, things got better. Pramukh Swami Maharaj, you could see that the skin was healing. But there was one mark that got left. There was a mark on his nose. It was a red mark. We could see this for many decades. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often say that this, Shastriji Maharaj left this mark on my face as a reminder of the seva that we had done back then. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj noted this in his diary. And in his diary, he said one very nice thing. He writes, પોતે પોતાના મંદવાડનું નિમિત્ત ઊભું કરી મને સેવામાં બોલાવી મારો રોગ ને ડાઘ કાઢી નાખ્યા તેમ દયા કરી. પોતે પોતાનું મંદવાડનું નિમિત્ત ઊભું કરી. He used his illness as an excuse to call me over so that I could benefit from it. Not only that, to heal my burns and scars. How compassionate Shastriji Maharaj is. When it was time for Shastriji Maharaj, Pramukh Sai Maharaj to leave and go back to Atladra, Shastriji Maharaj called him back. And he said, and he called Pramukh Sai Maharaj and he says, look, now that you're going back, I don't want you to go and work in the limestone again. Don't work with the limestone anymore. He wrote a letter to Dev Prasad Swami and told him that, to give Pramukh Sai Maharaj any other seva for the construction of the mandir except the limestone.
We can see, Shastriji Maharaj gave so much love to Pramukh Swami Maharaj. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj also took that love, and Shastriji Maharaj, whenever he called him, he went there, he did his seva, he did his bhakti, and whatever his guru said, he would do.
Overcoming storms of opposition with his divine powers, Shastriji Maharaj continued building mandirs as victorious symbols of Akshar Purushottam Upasana. The fourth installment of this glorious journey was well on its way in Atladra. Swami Shri had spent the last 8 to 10 months here prior to Pratishtha doing various sevas to help facilitate the mandir construction. In fact, Swami Shri spent significant time on bamboo scaffolding. Swami Shri didn't have any fear navigating the scaffolding even at the highest levels. Using chain pulleys, Swami Shri poured sweat in raising stones atop to the mandir. Self-preservation never came to his mind when engaging in this type of seva. In light of this, Swami Shri has described an unfortunate incident that took place during that time.
The construction of Atladra Mandir was in full force. A lot of santos and hari bhaktas were engaged in the seva of building the whole mandir. નાની મોટી બધા જ સેવા કરતા, including Pramukh Sai Maharaj. The stone for the mandir used to come by sea from Porbandar to Bharuch.
And in Bharuch, Kalidas Bhai Thakkar would unload the freight. The freight would then get loaded onto a smaller train. We had a connection in the Indian Railway by the name of Bhogi Bhai Trivedi, who was employed as the divisional traffic superintendent. With his approval, we were able to have a stop arranged in Atladra for the train carrying our stones. So the stones would be unloaded off the train and off the train wagon in Atladra and then reloaded onto a cart and then brought to the mandir. There were very few laborers available at the time, and so Hari Bhakto and Santo often did this work of loading or unloading these stones, even when it was off campus. Some of these stones were more than 1.5 feet thick. So once there was a shipment of stones that came in, they needed to be unloaded from the train wagon, and Dev Prasad Swami was the main stone person. And so he said to Swami, you should come along to get these stones unloaded. And Swami Shri was hesitant because of his inexperience. However, Dev Prasad Swami insisted that he come. And so Swami Shri, Harjivandas Swami, Dev Prasad Swami, and 2 other people went for this task. The wagon on the train was an open wagon. The edge of the wagon was about 5 to 6 inches wide. Swami Shri was standing near the edge. The process was to simply use a crowbar and wedge it to move the stone and unload it. They were able to move the first 2-3 stones relatively easily. Then they came upon a stone that was 9 feet long and 2.5 feet wide. Dev Prasad Swami and Harijivan Das Swami were on one side trying to wedge the crowbar underneath the stone. The two Santo made one coordinated push, lifting the stone off the ground. What they didn't realize was that Swami Shri was trying to place packing material at the edge of the opposite side to prevent it from sliding.
આ લોકોને ખબર કે એને પેકિંગ મુકાઈ ગયું છે એટલે એમને બે આમ કોસ કરીને પથ્થર બહુ મોટો હતો એટલે ઊંચો કર્યો અને ઊંચો કર્યો એટલે પથ્થરો એવો સીધો પેલી ધાર આ ધાર ને એની વચ્ચે અમારા બે આંગળા આવી ગયા. હું કાઢવા ગયો ખરો પણ નીકળી ના શક્યો અને એમનો પથ્થરો એકદમ બળથી આ લોકો એવું પથ્થરો કરી નાખ્યો એટલે હું એમને ખબર ના રહી ને મને મારાથી નીકળી ના શક્યો એટલે પેલી ધાર અને આના પર પથ્થરો એટલો બધો આવી ગયો.
He fell, unconscious, dizzy. They lifted him up. They goes, oh, what's happened? Everyone was shocked. They took him to Shastriji Maharaj. અને સાચમાને કહ્યું કે સ્વામી આવું થયું છે. સાચમા એના માથા પર હાથ ફેર્યો, આંગળી પર હાથ ફેર્યો. Nothing will happen કે છે. You will be okay કે છે. Don't worry. 1.5 hours he was unconscious. He rested.
અને આ આગળ હાવ એ થઈ ગયા જે થઈ ગયા આ છે આ નખ છે એ પણ નવો છે અને આ નખ પણ નવો છે. જો ને જરા નીકળી ગયેલો છે નવો આવેલો છે ને તે જરા એવો છે જો કે પણ હાફ પડ્યો જે આમ માગરી હતી એટલે જો આ કાળો અને આ બી નવો આવેલો બે નવા નખ આવેલા તો પછી મહિને 1.5 મહિને એ કામ થયેલું આમ બસ આ બે આંગળી એટલે એનાથી થઈ ગયેલ પછી ભગવાન દયાથી મહિનો થોડુંક આપણે કરવું પડ્યું પણ મટી ગયું પછી નખ નીકળી ગયા ધીરે ધીરે અને હોજો આવતો ગયો.
Swami Shri's life story is full of chilling moments, and the character in these incidents really comes from the fact that invariably they are always interwoven with Swami Shri's seva and his devotion. In this traumatic event, his thoughts following the event are so amazing. Swami Shri said that his goal was to please his guru. He had gained so much strength from one idea. Shastriji Maharaj che એટલે વાંધો નહીં આવે, બધું આપણું સારું થશે. With that, he had tied up a bandage and got back to work unloading stones, transporting them to the mandir, and then lifting them up onto the mandir itself. He never entertained the idea of dropping the seva. Swami Shri says that what happened to him was no big deal. There were so many incidents like this, but no one became demotivated from doing seva, and more seva.
તો આ પણ ગુરુ ભક્તિ, સેવાનો ઈશક, craving to do seva, કે I want to be part of this project. I want to be doing seva. I want to please my Guru, Shastriji Maharaj.
Shastriji Maharaj meant everything to Narayan Swarup Das. But with Shastriji Maharaj now at the age of 84, Naranda was about to endure a moment that no one could prepare him for.
They celebrated Shastriji Maharaj's 84th birthday. And after that, Shastriji Maharaj ended up going to Nenpur, where there was a Parayan. So Shastriji Maharaj was supposed to be in Nenpur for the Parayan. Halfway through the Parayan, Shastriji Maharaj had to go to Ahmedabad. Unfortunately, while he was in Ahmedabad, he suffered a heart attack.
But Pramukh Swami Maharaj was there in Nanpur, but the only thing he could think of was Shastriji Maharaj. He finished the Parayan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj finished the Parayan, and he went straight to Ahmedabad to see Shastriji Maharaj. When he saw Shastriji Maharaj like that on the bed, he could not hold in his emotions.
It was almost like the life was sucked out of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. That's how he felt at that time. And he started to cry. He was very emotional just seeing his guru in such a poor condition. Luckily, Shastriji Maharaj woke up, and as soon as he got up, he saw Naranda. And he looked at Pramukh Swami Maharaj and smiled. And that smile was everything that was needed to bring life back into Pramukh Swami Maharaj. It may seem like a small incident, but for Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Shastriji Maharaj was everything.
We can see that the guru-bhakti that he had, the oneness that he had with his guru, that his guru should not suffer, not even a little bit. Give that suffering to me, but don't give any suffering to my guru.
Shastriji Maharaj's love for Narayana was similar to a love of a mother. And like a child's reaction, it was natural for Naranda to be in great distress when seeing his guru in such a precarious state. But perhaps this early warning was serving a higher purpose. In the next episode, we see Shastriji Maharaj's love for Naranda evolve from one as a mother to one as a father. Narayan Swarup Das will find himself hurled into the deep end as Shastriji Maharaj places more responsibilities on his shoulders and parks him in the middle of difficult and highly delicate situations. Why was this necessary? And how will Naranda cope? Join us next time for episode 5, Chapita Tvameva.
મને તો એમ જ થયા કરે છે કે આપણા કેવા ભાગ્યનો પાર આવે એમ નથી કે પ્રમુખ સ્વામી જેવા ગુરુનો યોગ થયો. તેઓએ આપણને સૌને નિહાલ કર્યા છે. એ અનુભવ આ જીવન ચરિત્ર વાંચતા વિશેષ દ્રઢ થશે. આ વાંચતા ખૂબ જ આનંદ થશે. સ્વામી બાપા નજર આગળ તરવરવા લાગશે.
कैसा जादू आप मिले ओ स्वामी, कैसा जादू आप मिले स्वामी हम पे किया, हर खुशी से हमारा जीवन भर दिया स्वामी, भर दिया. दिल में तेरे लिए कुर्बानी रहे प्रमुख स्वामी, तुम्हारी कहानी रहे. जब तक धरती पे सूरज की रोशनी रहे, ये सितारे और चांद की वो चांदनी रहे. प्रमुख स्वामी तुम्हारी कहानी रहे. प्रमुख स्वामी तुम्हारी